We are now at ECL9 Leiden I350 order. The point of this section is give an introduction to the criteria or framework with respect to letter decoding criteria, which means that somehow the Greek letters shown here have to have originated from the Egyptian numeral system, because the Greek alphabet first attested in about 2600 A on the Samos cup comes after the Leiden I350, which is attested in 3200 A. So for example, when we look at letter H, which is the Ogdod sign, we find, which is attested on the UJ number tags here and here. When we go to stanza 80, we find the Ogdod mentioned. Likewise, as everyone knows, in Christianity and Hebrew, what is the name of the flood god? Of course, Noah. So Noah starts with N. Likewise, in Hinduism, the flood god is called Vishnu, center letter is N. So when we go to Leiden I350 stanza 50, we should find something that has to do with the flooding. So we go back to stanza 50, and we see the headpiece of the flood god Happy. And this has been translated by Bernard Matthew as Happy, deaf from his cave, coming out from his underground spring water cave. Likewise, letter R, the ram-horned sun should be found. The Ra, the sun god, should be found in one of these stanzas. So we go to 200. Originally, Ra should have been in stanza 100, but since this was a Theban papyrus, means there were certain recensions. There were different supreme gods that came every 5 to 1,000 years. So Amun is the new supreme god. And there's Ra is 2 R's, that's 3 R's. And in between here we find Poof, Ra mentioned, according to the Matthew translation. So this gives us a framework to understand where the alphabet came from. It didn't come from Semites in Sinai or writing on some cave. It was already tested in the Leiden I350 papyrus in Egypt. Now we come to farming order. Now this is something I didn't fully understand until about 2 years ago. But here we see a Rehab Hilu, Lebanese electronics engineer and linguist, who in her The Phoenician Alphabet Hidden Mysteries says that the first 14 letters of the Phoenician alphabet came from the 14 pieces of Osiris. This is not fully correct, but it's a good first jab at the puzzle. So now we know that letter M is the sickle that chops up Osiris. Letter N is the end bend of the Nile, which Set, the god, his brother, throws the pieces of Osiris in, and the phallus gets lost in the end bend of the Nile. And here we see the confused gardener model in between this, where he says that Semites in Sinai carved the alphabet on this cave wall, which gave birth to the alphabet, which is nothing but Bible dreaming, or now we see the Celeste Horner model. She conjectures that letter A came from a hoe and a basket. So the basket's not correct, but the hoe is correct. But she loosely alludes to the idea that the alphabet came from farming order. This is what's called her farming order hypothesis, developed in A67. So I read, after I decoded that the A was the sickle, I then looked up to see if there was anybody else who said that the hoe is the letter A was the sickle, and I found Celeste Horner. And her models about farming order, hoeing and sowing, was what allowed me to decode letter E. So here we see me after reading Horner. I conjectured that in between hoeing, I had already deciphered the letter M was the sickle or reap. In between hoeing and reap, there had to be a sowing letter. So in between A and M, there had to be a letter E, which I couldn't figure out before August A67. So in other words, first you have to hoe the ground, then you have to sow the ground before you can reap it, or before the ground can grow, then you can reap it. And you also have to water has to come in. So I didn't know where letter E came from at this point. So here we have hoe, sow. Desert is stuff that doesn't grow after being sowed. You have crops, you reap it with letter M, and then the new flood comes again with letter N. Here's Egyptian pictures of this. Hoeing, sowing, hoeing with letter A, plows or hoes, and there's a human-powered hoe right there, letter A shaped. So at this point I was confused where letter E came from. But the farming order hypothesis gave me, I ended up looking for what the word sow means, seed in Egyptian, and I ended up finding the triple phallus, which is letter E. Here we see the flood cycle. So the flood comes up. The flood starts, letter N. When Sirius rises, the waters of the Nile rise. Waters coming from the melted snow of the Ethiopian mountains. They peak in the middle of summer, August, September, where letter R is the hottest ram-powered, most powerful month of the sun, and then they recede. And then in about December's over here where Sampi is, and then the sun is reborn or relit by the fire drill of Ta, which is letter Phi. This is what's called farming or flood cycle. So you have to keep this in mind. Certain letters which define the flood cycle are Sampi and Janus both equal the same number. So this defines that the Djed is raised in about January 8th, is over here, 6th to 8th.